what was involved with cutting a body of water, usually a pond or a lake, for useful ice for refrigeration started very early in the season, where a foreman or the owner of the pond or the owner of the ice company would monitor the pond and make sure that it was freezing to the quality that they were looking for. A lot of ponds, if we notice this year, had very milky ice on them. And milky ice, the whiter the ice, the brighter the ice, the more air there is mixed into it. And the more air, the less refrigeration quality, and therefore the less value. So what the ice company owners were looking for was what is referred to as black ice, absolutely clear, like a plate glass window ice. And there are ways that ice companies could enhance the freezing of a pond by putting boards by an outlet, by a dam, and making the water level rise so it would soak the milky ice that was already there, and it would refreeze clearer. And they were all approaches like this that an ice company could do. And then as the season progressed, they would take test drillings or chopping, either with an ice axe or an ice auger, to tell how thick the ice was. And once the ice got to be about a foot, or it got too late in the season, because being a natural product, you have to kind of be careful about that. But once the ice got to the ultimate goal, which was a foot, that's when the foreman or the owner of the ice company would call out a crew. That is when all of your day laborers, all your part-time employees of the company would be brought in, and there would be young men, boys and young men, that would be assigned the job of sawing. There were people that were assigned the job of breaking blocks. They were assigned a job of pikemen. So to expand on what that all meant is that the first thing you would do would be to chop a head channel. You would chop enough ice away to give open water enough so that your saws could enter the pond. Before that head channel was open, you would have a crew that would come in, very skilled crew, sometimes the foreman, sometimes other people that had experience, and they would grave the surface of the pond using an ice plow. They would scrape lines parallel to each other, running in one direction, 22 inches apart from each other, and then turn 90 degrees and scrape lines 22 inches away from each other. The standard in the ice industry for a block was 22 by 22 by 1 foot. So they would have graved the surface of the pond, and then when the sawyers stepped up to the channel, they would put their saw in at the beginning of one of those marks, one of those scrape marks on the surface, and using a rowing motion, they would basically saw the line till they got out on the other side, in effect, or you went as far as what they wanted to cut that day. And behind the sawyers comes a whole crew of people with what are called breaker bars. And with the breaker bars, they snap off the blocks right where one of those 90-degree lines run, and that will give you your 22 by 22 inch block. So they walk along and they're snapping off. And the reason why that works is ice has grain that grows from the surface downward. So a breaker bar, in effect, is like an axe. If you ever split kindling, it'll split along with the grain. So they're splitting those blocks with the grain of ice that's been created naturally on the pond. The next men that are involved are the pikemen, and the pikemen are the people that float the blocks of ice to the end of the channel. And in many cases, that would be drawn up by a steam-powered or horse-powered elevator into an ice house storage area. Guys working inside that were called twitchers would shift the blocks of ice, the 100-pound, whatever plus blocks of ice, around the floor of the ice house, like playing Tetris, but with 300-pound blocks of ice coming at your legs. You would twitch these from one area till you created a floor. Then they would raise their gangway up and they would slide the next load in. And what your ultimate goal was to have all those blocks freeze all back together and create a huge thermal mass. If you could not fill your entire ice house, which was multi-walled, what you would do is you would then put a tarpaulin and some sawdust or salt marsh hay or straw or something like that to insulate the ice so it was not in contact with the open air.
But they needed to push the ice into the channel. Then they come up as they go up to the ice house. That was my job.
What was that?
It's run and run, they call it. The ice house, there's a run. And it was the same thing up there. They come in the channel with it, and they hook onto the ice house. They started with horses, but then they got it with a truck, you know. And the old truck used to pull it up there.
When ice houses were first conceived, above ground ice houses were first conceived, they were built as tight as possible. And what would happen is that when ice was being retrieved in warm weather, people would open the doors to go in and get the ice, and the warm air would go in. And of course, cold air falls, displaces the warm air rises, and it would melt the top layer. So early on, what they decided to do was to put cupolas or vents on the upper portion of the ice house. So you were always drawing any warm air, you were drawing out immediately, because that's a natural flow that would happen with the warm air. So an ice house in the 19th century in August might be 95 degrees on the outside when somebody goes in. In the ice house, it might be literally 45 degrees, and in the core of the ice, it's still 32.
As far as the ice house is concerned, they tore it down after they stopped building it. They tore it all down. So it's all gone now. You wouldn't even know.
No sign.
Yeah. It was just as you're going into the lake there. Yeah, about 10 feet.
Yeah.
10 feet from the lake, yeah.
In the wintertime, it's all outlay. I mean, you're not selling ice in the winter, so you're spending all this money. It's exactly the opposite of somebody that's growing corn, you know, where they're buying their seed in the springtime and then sweating it out to the fall when you're waiting to harvest. Well, in an ice crew, you're sweating it out till it gets warm enough where somebody's going to want what you have, your commodity.
It was all labor, you know. They didn't get paid very much either. I can remember my uncles, for a week's pay, they used to go to, my grandmother used to pay them. She'd pay them $25. That's what they got a week. It was a big thing in them days because people used to wait for it to work. They didn't want so much work. People didn't work in the wintertime. We used to hang around in the winter. Nobody worked in the wintertime, not very many people, I mean. That used to be a big thing. If a couple of weeks you put ice in the houses, they used to give them some work and make an extra dollar, you know. That was a long time ago. I was in high school. I used to take the time off to ice out. I don't think I ever made it up, but I don't know. And then my grandmother and my aunt, they used to bring up dinner. They used to cook it down home and bring it up to her. Everybody eat it there. She used to be, a hell of a gang to eat there. They used to have roast beef and chicken and I don't know what else they had there. They used to have a lot of fun doing it. It was a big thing. People used to look forward to it. They didn't get much pay, but they had a good time.
You know, people had tin boxes or wooden boxes by the back door of their kitchen. So they really didn't start delivering ice or people buying ice till May or June, very often June. And then when you get into July and August, they might be getting a delivery every day instead of every other or every third day. So it kind of starts off slow, then gets really busy, and then tails off again. And by the time you get into September and October, at least for local businesses with the old style mindset, they don't really feel they need the refrigeration anymore. They were still commercially delivering ice to people's houses in Boston in 1950 because there still were people that were holding out that were not going to buy a refrigerator.
Yeah, it was quite a business he had. Good many years. I don't know how many years they had it there. But the water was good, good and clear. Delivered in Stockbridge and Glendale, all over Stockbridge. People had ice houses in their own places, like Red Light Inn, and they used to load up the sleigh rides, and they did the same thing. That's how they got it onto the sleigh. They had a little ramp, and they used to drag it up to the sleigh, and they'd take them to the ice houses around, and they'd put them in the ice houses, put sawdust on them, and be there all summer for them. Well, yes, the old wagon, they used to go around town, and kids used to come out, get the ice, the chipped ice, you know.
Once people start worrying about the quality of the water that their ice is being made from, you find companies like the Knickerbocker Ice Company out of New York that for decades had harvested ice on the Hudson River no longer had that available to them because of pollution in the river, runoff from farms and from urban areas. So they came in the Berkshires and they actually rented the rights to harvest Richmond Pond and other bodies of water in the Berkshires. So in that case, I mean, Knickerbocker was the second or third largest ice company in the United States, and they're doing well over 500,000 tons of ice. So they would be one of the bigger players in the Berkshires, but they're not local, and they're bringing their guys in and they're working and then they're leaving. You know, they're going on a train. But then as the industry growth shifted from export to domestic, the volume of ice that was cut continues to go up if you graph the business out. But the export goes down and down and down because the domestic people are putting in a demand. People have been sold the fact that even though for thousands and thousands of years people didn't have ice, they used pickling, they used salt, they used drying, they used all kinds of methods to preserve food. All of a sudden people wanted quote unquote fresh food year round. So ice became the way to go. And then you had more and more local ice companies that were answering to a local demand. And there literally was not a body of water that was not cut for ice. And there literally was not a town that did not at one time or another have an ice company. It might have only lasted for 4 or 5 years, but they do come and go. And some communities even had more than one. And each one of those companies might be putting away 95 ton, 50 ton of ice a year. So relatively small players in the overall business, but it still adds up when you look at the number of bodies of water around there.
They used to take about a quarter of the lake off. But the lake is 20 acres, you know. Take a quarter of it, you don't get too much off of it. So yeah, ice used to be, you know, you get a big cake of ice, that was 12, 14 inches thick. And it lasts a long time.
You know, most people are very familiar and very proud of the blacksmith they had in their family, or I had a family member. They forget about the 9 guys that were working in the ice companies. You know, I mean, it was just, you know, it's such a huge, huge business. Again, some of it being seasonal, but some of it being year round.